No one hates games more than gamers, is what I learned in April 2020 when the gaming discussions on social media were dominated by the leaks of The Last of Us 2. Never have I seen the intelligence of the gaming community so finely demonstrated than in that moment. The fake Neil Druckmann self-insert, Abby existing, death threats towards one of the lead actresses and her family, and even now, years after the game's release, people are still pretty vocal about their criticisms of The Last of Us 2, some of which are valid, and some of which aren't. It's been almost 5 years since the game came out, and with the recent PC release, I was finally able to stop dodging spoilers and experience it myself. And yeah, I think this will go down as one of the greatest examples of why it's so important to try a game yourself instead of listening to the vocal minority on social media. There's a lot I could say about the story, but it's been 5 years and it's been talked about so much. So, for now, I'd rather talk about the other things that make this game so great. Because you're free to dislike it as much as you want, but there's a lot more to its appeal that's worth discussing. Just quickly, I'm not going to summarize the story, but I'll be discussing big events from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. You've been warned. When horror works well, it should be making you create things in your head, making you fear things that aren't even present, or making you feel like you're insane, or both. And in a good horror game, all of its elements, like the sound, the visuals, the combat, will come together to produce the intended result. Fear.
Oh my god!
The Last of Us 2, however, isn't a horror game in the traditional sense. Discomfort is produced in a far more intimate way. Realism. Looking at Naughty Dog's catalogue, you can see a clear tonal shift from light-hearted, vibrant platformers to these insane cinematic blockbuster-style action-adventure games. And over the years we've seen them continue to evolve both technically and visually, creating more lifelike characters, engaging stories, and becoming more seamless in their integration of filmic elements with gameplay. Graphical innovations have allowed for a wider range of expressions to be shown, and for story-rich games, it's a technical achievement that can really enhance the experience. Because now, a character's face can house the thousands of different complexities and subtleties in an actor's performance, helping to convey conflicting emotions, and that layer of realism helps us to connect with their happiness, their sadness, their anger, in a multifaceted way. And when you combine that with the appropriate filmic elements, it only strengthens that connection, from its most human moments to its most brutal ones. Violence is obviously a big part of The Last of Us 2. This is reflected in its combat. Now, I have played a mixture of games over the years, and a lot of them are very arcadey and fast-paced, especially the multiplayer ones. But with The Last of Us 2, the combat is slower, but a lot more dynamic. It's weighty and impactful. When you swing against someone, it's not just an attack. The game wants you to know that this is a solid object, making swift contact with bone and flesh. When you shoot someone, it's not just an enemy, it's a person who is now screaming for help or choking on their blood after you pulled the trigger.
God.
Enemies can even beg for help when you shoot them. They are incredibly reactive, and because of this, not every encounter plays out in the same way. In regards to enemy types, you have the reckless and aggressive infected, who charge straight for you as soon as they see you. You have the WLF, or wolves, who search in packs, armed with a lot of the same weapons that you have. And then you have the Seraphites, who are arguably the most dangerous due to how organized they are. They rely on stealth, bows and arrows, and melee weapons, using their own form of communication as they maneuver themselves to strategically flush you out. Now, you're not completely powerless in the situation, but the game never lets you forget that you are a single person up against a group of others. You cannot simply charge at them and come in swinging from person to person, thinking that you'll miraculously dodge bullets. If you try this, the game will put you in your place. You don't have to necessarily go in quietly either, but you need to be mindful of your situation. 9 times out of 10, you are not in a position to just headshot every single enemy because you have limited ammo. You have to work with what you've got, and even if you plan out a scenario in your head, it won't always go as planned. The game is constantly putting you on the spot, forcing you to adapt to enemies that won't wait for you to catch up.
Oh! Oh! Shit! There's something big in the room with you. Whoa!
If you shoot and miss, enemies immediately take the opportunity to fire back. It makes it feel like every moment counts, and it emphasizes these tense moments with handheld camera movements and shaky close-ups. It seamlessly weaves its cinematic choices into its gameplay, so seamlessly in fact that in some of its sequences you can forget you're even holding a controller, as the scene suddenly pivots from one chaotic moment to another. Something I really appreciate about this game is how it broke conventions, or at least subverted expectations. When moving from exploration to a combat encounter, the game usually signals this change to the player with the character warning them and taking their weapon out, and the music and HUD fade in. And when the encounter is over, the opposite essentially happens. This sets a precedent. When this happens, I am in danger. When it stops, I'm safe. And for most games, you expect the utmost level of safety when you're in a menu or pause screen, right? Well, I think I was about 9 hours into my playthrough, and I was just exploring and looting a building, like you usually do in this game, and I found a workbench to upgrade my weapon. And then some dickhead pinned me to the table and a bunch of soldiers started shooting at me.
Jesus. What the fuck, people?
From that point on, I never felt safe or certain of things, and it employs that fear in some other ways too. At particular points in this game, the characters just die. It's sudden, it's heartbreaking, but there's no time to linger on it. One moment you are talking to them, and the next they're dead. And that feels more real, more final. Death is sudden, cruel, and indiscriminate. And it obviously has an impact. There's that point in the story where after viewing the world from their respective sides, Ellie and Abby have their big confrontation at the theatre, and then it cuts to Ellie and Dina with their baby living peacefully on a farm. I immediately felt confused when this happened because it's such a sudden change, you know, like where's my revenge story? But after a few minutes I started to settle into this new world where Ellie and Dina are happy.
I got one for you.
Get in the bot! Stop it!
And just as you're easing into this,
Come on, little dude. Come on, little guy. Do you want to eat?
Ellie has a PTSD episode and begins reliving Joel's death.
Ellie? Hey, Ellie. Look at me. It's okay. You're home. You're home.
It's a harrowing scene, and these instances of death and violence made me sympathize more with these characters. But these feelings, these conflicting emotions that transcended the screen and crossed over to me, I think a lot of it is dependent on how much you connected with these characters in the story. In a story-rich game like this, it's close to impossible to disconnect yourself from its narrative, especially because of how it's so strongly present in its gameplay. You have to play as Abby, the woman who murdered Joel. It's very easy to reject Abby as a person, not just because of her cruelty in the beginning, but simply because of the way she looks. We see a character who is very muscular and rugged, and isn't what we've come to expect of female characters in games. Because of her appearance, a lot of people regard her as being subhuman, and then she becomes even more monstrous when she brutally murders a character very near and dear to us. Now, Joel's death is one of the most well-known gaming spoilers out there. I'm very jealous of you if you managed to experience the game without knowing this. And as soon as everyone saw who did it, we were again exposed to the most brain-dead fucks in the community. In case it isn't obvious, I don't give a fuck about Abby's appearance. I think she's cool, she looks like a badass. In my opinion, her appearance fits her character. This game goes out of its way to show you her journey, the events that sparked her quest for revenge and led to her becoming a cruel and hardened person, both inside and out. And we've seen the same journey play out with male characters many times, but so few with female characters, which makes the backlash even more shameful. And while I was confused and disheartened as to why she murdered Joel in the first place, I was still open to learning more about her. I completely understand why you might not like her, and you don't have to like her, but I think that people were so overcome by their hatred of Abby that they refused to even acknowledge her human side. And it's very rewarding to let go of this hatred and to explore her connections with the characters. As much as a lot of players tried to reject Abby, she is still a person. When I initially played as her, I had this assumption that she could easily one-on-one anyone who tries to take her on because she's so fucking built.
Another strong woman! You stronger! Me!
This is not the case. Yes, she can still crush infected under her boots.
Oh my god!
But if you put her up against a clicker, she can die just as easily as Ellie can. If you play through her story, you'll learn that she has a strong fear of heights and becomes explicitly uncomfortable at looking down. Every time you do look down, she starts whimpering, and it's accompanied by this dolly zoom. I know what you're thinking. Oh, she has a fear of heights, who cares? But even the smallest details can play a part in your relationship with the character. Inside and outside the story, I found myself sympathizing with her. And in the final confrontation between Ellie and Abby, I just felt so sorry for both of these characters. These women who have just become shells of what they once were. But again, this is dependent on how you feel about the characters. I felt strongly connected to both of them, so seeing them get hurt or lose people they love had a strong impact on me. Even in gameplay, seeing characters in danger and distress made me, well, stressed. So seeing two characters that I've grown fond of, who are now stretched so thin, fighting in a battle that has no winner. It's deeply upsetting, but it's a sadness that only works if you felt similar to me, and Neil Druckmann said it himself. He had hoped that by the end of the game, players would be rooting for both of them, and that players would go through an emotional journey of hating Abby and then coming to understand her. But if you don't understand her, the game doesn't work. However, I believe that even if you reject Abby to the very end, you still have an amazing game. I mean, I think the fact that people are so divided on it to this day means something. Again, you don't have to like Abby or the story. I appreciate the fact that we can disagree on it and that it's not clear-cut, that we're able to have these complex discussions. A story like this has so many interesting topics to discuss, such as violence, morality, grief, empathy, trauma, and outside of that is a game that is so incredibly detailed and that excels at incorporating its core themes into its gameplay. It has a special place in my heart for its characters, its story, its music, its combat, and I will remember it for the way it challenged me and forced me to confront the worst in people, for reminding me of what it means to be human.